to your organization. And in the middle is this bubble called adaptability. In our experience here at NSF, this is where the field is evolving in our thinking and our ability to consider that having money that is in fact flexible and able to allow us to make adjustments is a critical part of operating in today's environment. Those of you who are managing arts and culture organizations or funding them understand very well just how important this is. And so what we say is, in order to address these things, there's essentially some shifts that need to take place in how nonprofits and funders think about and use money. And so this is the journey that we are on. Next slide, please. So one critical piece in this is that in the universe of nonprofits, we have two distinct kinds of money that are often confused and treated as if they are the same. We'll just take a moment to explain the difference. Revenue is money that comes into the organization and pays for the organization to do what it does, whether it's creating new work, reviving work, whether it's paying the bills for the administrative staff, all of those basic things that happen on an annual basis. Revenue is required to pay for those things. Capital is a little more specific in that it is intended to be episodic. Periodically, an organization might receive capital to address a number of different things, including the liquidity, adaptability, and durability that we mentioned earlier. And one of the best things about capital in the for-profit sector is that it is widely understood that capital is provided to a company in order to help them generate net revenue in the future, and to therefore be healthy and able to provide services for the long term. The point that we want to make today is that all organizations, arts and otherwise in the nonprofit sector, need both revenue and capital to thrive. And as I said earlier, because these two types of money are treated the same from an accounting standpoint, and often in the way that we ask for money and receive money, you can imagine the scenarios in which that might confuse what is ordinarily something that you would want to keep distinct. So I'm going to push ahead and say, how do organizations obtain capital? I want to state very clearly that nothing that I'm stating today should be perceived by anyone on this call as NSF is saying, this is really easy, you should all be able to do this starting at the end of this call. What we are saying, however, is what we're seeing in our work and in the field is that the organizations that are able to adapt and grow in a sensible way are the ones that are able to set money aside to allow them to make smart choices. And that's really about capitalization. So you basically get it from two sources. One is generating surpluses. That means more revenue than expense, and you build your balance sheet with those resources. And the other is occasional infusions, as we say here, of capital, which could be in the form of debt, and it could be in the form of special fundraising. And a capital campaign for a building is an example of that. But it's not really what we're talking about today, which is really about how do you find funds that are flexible. So let's go to the next slide and say that that's where this initiative comes into place. The Nonprofit Finance Fund has partnered with the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation to select a group of 10 artistically excellent performing arts organizations. And we have provided each of them $1 million in what we're calling change capital. And change capital is a very specific kind of money that allows organizations to do a range of things. So if you go to, these are the 10 organizations with whom we have been partnering in this initiative. On the next slide, I'll just give you a high level of what we're talking about. So each organization receives $1 million, and they draw it down based on their plans for using that money to create change in their organization. Each of them, as you can see here, also receive some planning money. Ultimately, the organizations are making adaptations to how they do what they do that in the long term will achieve improved net revenue. For most organizations in the initiative, the goal has been to meaningfully improve net revenue generation during the 5-year period of the initiative. As it is an experimental initiative, Nonprofit Finance Fund and the folks at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation agreed it was appropriate that the horizon for revenue generation would be longer term for each of today's participants. Each is investing in and testing creative techniques that will engage audiences. These efforts are intended to secure their future artistically as well as financially over time. As we all know, ultimately, audiences equal success. The role that Nonprofit Finance Fund has been playing is to manage and administer the initiative and to share the lessons with the field. Specifically, we've been providing some consulting support around planning and implementation to each of the organizations. And amongst themselves and now with the outside world, we are sharing, capturing and sharing the learning that our participants have been gleaning along the way. So with that said, I'll invite you, if you haven't already, to learn more about Leading for the Future. This image you may recognize. It's the cover of our Case for Change Capital in the Arts, and it is Merce Cunningham, I believe, roughly 1975. And in this document, we attempt to articulate what we've set out to do in this initiative. And I can give you a heads up that sometime in early 2013, we'll be sending out some thoughts about what we've learned throughout the initiative and where we are ending up with our 10 organizations. So that's an overview of capitalization and the Leading for the Future initiative in less than 5 minutes. I hope you all took copious notes. I'm kidding. Let's now hear from the participants in the initiative. We're going to start with our friends from Steppenwolf Theater Company. Rebecca and Linda, the floor is now yours.
Hi, this is Rebecca Rugg. I'm the artistic producer here at Steppenwolf, and I'm here with Linda Garrison, who led our research on audiences and our initiatives in our lobby on pricing and our website that we'll be covering today. So our presentation is called Millennials at the Theater, with a very excited exclamation point. Just for reference, the millennials we're referring to are the age group of people who are between 22 and 30 years old. They're out of college, they're in their early career, and this is the generation of people who Steppenwolf was very interested to try to create a relationship with as audiences at our theater. Next slide, please. So the context for our research and our project with this change capital is a sort of widespread and widely known generational crisis in the performing arts. I feel like we're all aware of that as culture workers, that there's, especially in theater, an aging subscriber audience and a kind of widespread fear that this younger audience of the millennial generation has been abducted by technology. So we set out to create programming and research to investigate this.
Next slide, please. Steppenwolf felt particularly vulnerable to these trends since engaging multi-generational audiences in conversation really lies at the heart of our mission. Next slide, please. For us, the opportunity to learn how to integrate young artists and audiences into the theater was an opportunity to find ways to achieve our mission more effectively. Next slide, please. We knew we did not know enough to identify what activity would create success, so for us, the significance of this funding allowed us to know more about young artists and audiences, how to trigger changes in attitude and behavior that would support regular and frequent visits. And it also allowed us to develop tools and practices that would create what we call sustainable change. Next slide, please. Very early on, we made a very important strategic decision about who we were going to learn about. We did not want just any millennial in our audience, but we knew that, like with our non-millennial audience, there's a particular kind of person who comes to Steppenwolf, and that was we wanted to find a younger version of that person. So we went about looking for culturally active or culturally interested young live performance attenders, because we knew that it would be beyond our resources to convince someone to like live performance or theater. We embarked upon a very robust learning path. We did focus groups among this target audience, asking them about what their behaviors were in live performance in general, what their perceptions of Steppenwolf was, what their attendance of Steppenwolf was, how they felt about our website. We did an audit of performing arts fields to find out what their experience was with young audiences, and also an audit of consumer brands with Patricia Martin to find out what they knew about attracting young audiences. Next slide, please. What we found out, well, I'm sorry.
One back.
One back. Nope, another one.
Whoa.
Whoa. There we go. Thank you. What we found out was that among culturally active young audiences, they love live performance. And their love of it runs deep. In Chicago, their top 3 live performance venues are music, theater, and improv. And in theater, their definition of is really quite broad. They like it edgy and surprising. They consider themselves omnivorous when it comes to theater. They also go to live performance a lot. They go between 4 and 8 times a month. It's a big social event for them. And I think the attendance, the frequency numbers for us were really quite eye-opening, because at this age, they don't have a lot of cap on their free time. They tend to be unattached, no children. And so for us, the question became, how do we program in such a way that we can capture this frequency? Next slide, please. We also learned that they admire Steppenwolf, but for them, they see it as a big theater, meaning it's a more formal event to come, it's a little pricier, They don't see in the audience a lot of people like themselves, so it's hard to socialize. They most often opt for the intimacy of storefront. So the issue to us was, how do we create a familiarity and a comfort level with Steppenwolf that allows them to feel like this is a place that they belong? Next slide, please. Even though they are no longer students, for them, budget is still an issue. We discovered that there was really a low awareness among this group of discounts that the theater did offer, and that importantly, there was really nothing about our price offering that distinguished us from other theaters in the city. Next slide, please.
So in doing this research with audiences and listening to them, it provided many possible conclusions for us about avenues that we might take as a result of this research. And I have a really strong memory of standing in front of a focus group, in front of a double pane of glass with Linda Garrison, just sort of looking at each other and saying, wow, you know, the things that these people are saying, these culturally active millennial audiences, have huge implications for programming. And so getting to know our audiences better led us to realize we needed to get to know young artists better. And so we changed what we made in 3 ways. Next slide, please. So we decided to undertake a number of experiments in programming, and primarily these were directed at the theater that we call the Steppenwolf Garage, which is a small 80-seat house just down the street from our main house that's located in the first floor of what we use as our parking garage on the other floors. So it's our smallest space, but it's related geographically to where our subscriber audiences are used to coming. So in that space, we, as I said, changed what we made. We went out with an invitation to young artists to really try to figure out what they wanted to make. And so our artistic offerings changed. The way that we presented them changed. We mostly, in that space, produced in rotating repertory, and we mostly produced for fairly long runs. And we also learned from those artists that they were interested in Steppenwolf helping them gain skills in producing. And so those are kind of 3 ways that our programming changed as a result of that early research. So I'll talk more about programming, but I would say that the next slide, yeah, the change of Steppenwolf can be talked about in terms of programming, and then Linda will come back and talk about the change in terms of pricing and in terms of environment. Next slide. So specifically in the garage, the programs that we have running there now are First Look, which is a rotating rep of new plays. Next Up, which is a collaboration with Northwestern University in which we present the MFA thesis shows of students in their design and directing program. And Garage Rep, which is also a rotating rep in which we invite local young storefront companies to apply to produce work in our space through a pretty robust mentorship program led by our associate producer, Jacob Padron. We also produce as many opportunistic standalone productions as we can in the garage in an effort to go after more continuity of weeks of programming in there. And we're also doing an experiment now with late night programming in an effort to provide young audiences with offerings at different times of day and more kinds of variety.
Next slide, please. We also decided to use storefront theaters here, of which there are many in Chicago, as our standard for ticket price, which meant that tickets to the garage cost $20, no matter what you're seeing. It also means that we had a $20 ticket that we offered to our main stage theater. We had that discount before, but I don't think very many people knew about it. So our $20 ticket, while it was universal in the garage, we also made it more easily accessible for any show at Steppenwolf, meaning that beforehand you had to show up day of at the box office to get one. Now you could buy one ahead of time, you could buy one online, and we created more presence around $20 tickets in our advertising. We also created a program that inside we called Millennial Membership. It was a pricing program that's especially for people who are under 30, and something that no one else in the city offers, and we called it, next slide please, we call it Red. Next slide. Thank you. And Red is a card that you buy if you are under 30 for $100. It's cheap tickets. You can come 6 times for that amount of money. It's cheap drinks. You get a drink discount, and you can bring your friends. You can use one of these 6 visits for your friend if you want. Importantly, it's not tied to a season, so unlike subscription, if you bought 5 tickets, I'm sorry, we're still on the previous slide.
And I think you want to go back one.
Yep, yeah, thank you. It's not tied to a season, so if you didn't use your 6 visits by the time the 12-13 season ran out, don't worry, it's also still good as long as you have the card in your pocket. Next slide, please. We also knew that we had to figure out a way to roll out the welcome mat, that we were still viewed as big theater and a little intimidating, and we wanted to change that message to this audience group to "You belong here." And we needed to do it in 2 places. We need to do it physically on campus, and that effort was an emphasis that we really placed on the garage, and also virtually, which led to a redesign of our website. Next slide, please. Given all the multiple programming changes in the garage, we also knew that we needed to redesign the garage theater, its identity and marketing materials to better communicate that something new and big was happening, and to make sure that it was consistent with Steppenwolf's identity as a place to see innovative and live performance. Next slide, please. We went into the garage and created a new lobby. We basically had to build a lobby every time we did programming in the garage, and we decided to do something that would be more permanent. And we basically rated flea markets, dumpster diving, prop shop, and local artists building installations in this lobby that I think comes very much close to what they encounter in storefront. We also know that pricing issues are not just about tickets, it's about food and drink as well. And so we offer PBR, that's Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. It's kind of a metaphor for anything that you can drink that costs $2. And we also invited food trucks to come and park in our lot during performance weeks, so that our audience could run out and grab something hot and fast and trendy without really placing a lot of burden on our own staff. Next, please. We also, next slide, please. We also embarked upon a significant web redesign in support of the mission of multi-generational conversation. We were looking to grow our capability to engage, to facilitate purchase and donation, and of course to support the idea of multi-generational conversation. Nothing could say it more clearly than someone in one of our focus groups who said after attending the theater, yeah, you're cool as a theater, but your website sucks. So we spent a lot of time redesigning our website.
Next slide, please. So as a result of these changes that we've made in programming, pricing, and environment, we feel pretty excited to say that we are becoming a different theater. This change capital has really catalyzed significant change for us as an institution. Next slide, please. And I think one of the most important ways in which this is true is that our relationship with young artists are changing. I think the depth of mentorship and the long conversation that we're having with the companies that we work with is really important. And also we've also discovered some pitfalls along the way, which I'll leave as a bit of a cliffhanger so that we can finish our presentation. But if people have interest in that during the Q&A, we can come back to it.
Next slide, please. So too, our audience composition is changing, and across the time period of this grant, we have basically doubled the number of millennials who are a part of our audience, and we've doubled our penetration of the millennial population inside our city. Next slide, please. Our digital engagement is changing. Since our new website has launched, overall page views per production and the average time spent on a production page has grown significantly. Next slide.
So to conclude, I would just say that the change that we've begun with the resources of this grant is leading to more change. I think that we think as an institution that our mission is expanding. We have already as part of our mission the desire for a multi-generational conversation, but we've begun to realize as that's become more robust the ways in which that's giving rise to what we think of here at Steppenwolf as a kind of public square, a space for civic dialogue that arises as a result of an audience's encounter with art. And so that kind of robust audience engagement is for us now beginning to drive a new campus vision in which we realize we need more public space in order to allow audiences to engage in the kind of conversation that we're hoping that they'll have after they see the things that we have on our stages. Next slide, please. So probably the most important thing for people listening today, and this is a bit of a provocation as our final thought, how to act like you have change capital. We think the very most important thing that you can do in order to act like you have change capital is listen to young artists. We think you need to talk to the next generation. So that means artists and audiences. Talk to your audience. Don't take someone else's word on who they are. Talk to them yourselves and begin to customize your programming for these artists and these audiences.
And I know talking to people and understanding what questions used to be asked to get to information that allows you to make change is difficult. And so one of the tips that we would pass along is to engage a marketing partner, a professional marketing partner, who can give you advice on how to ask questions and how to listen to the answers. Find a research company, an advertising agency, a public relations agency, someone who does audience research as a business, and help them and ask them to help you become better at it as well. And finally, to kind of get everybody started, all of the millennial best practices that we collected over the course of our research through Patricia Martin, you can access online. If you go to, if you look her up at Tipping the Culture, you can find out everything that we found out about how big companies are addressing this important audience segment. And she has a Twitter account as well, so if you have a specific question, you can ask her, and she will answer you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Linda. I wanted to remind those on the phone that if you have a question, you should feel free to submit it using the question feature on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. When our next presentation is done, we will have time for Q&A, so feel free to ask questions along the way. And I would now like to turn ourselves over to Michael and Joy at Center Theater Group. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I thought that was a great presentation, Steppenwolf. I thought it was terrific. We're here to talk about some changes we made at the Kirk Douglas Theater. We have 3 theaters, 2 that have been around for 45 years. It's our main campus in downtown Los Angeles. It's where our offices are. And in 2004, we opened a new theater, a half hour or 45 minutes away from our base of operations.
Next slide. Sorry.
Thank you. Next slide, Joy will help me with that. The new theater opened essentially as the same type of operation we had been running downtown. 6-show subscription season, subscription-based. It was over 50% of our audience when we started out, which was terrific. And we programmed essentially the same way we were programming at the other 2 theaters. What we found, however, was that we were incapable of producing some of the work, some of the art that we wanted to produce in that business model. Essentially, it came from a play that we had commissioned from Dale Orlando Smith, where I told her to write whatever play she wanted to write, and we would produce it. And when it came back, it was a wonderful, beautiful, dark, intense, troubling play, but it was not a play that would sustain a 4-week run in a 300-seat theater in front of a subscription audience.
Next slide, please.
So ultimately, we set out to produce more work, but when we started that, we knew that we wanted to do experiments in audience development and engagement. A big part of it was to break the subscription model, to bring in a younger audience, to bring in more progressive work, and to bring in younger artists.
Next slide.
The Change Capital actually gave us the chance to do that in a significant way. I believe we would have slowly stepped into it, but this grant allowed us to take an aggressive approach, to do it in a big way, to study it and to get responses, and in some ways to perfect it and to adapt it. In doing this, we not only wanted to do it to bring in new audiences, we didn't want to alienate our current audience. And one of the great things that we found from the past 3 years is that even though subscription audiences are older, they speak as one, you program for them, within those subscription audiences are some very adventurous theater goers. The great thing we learned were we weren't creating a completely new audience from scratch for these new shows. A good portion of them came over from our subscription audience.
Next slide.
So when we set out to do this, we were looking for 3 different dynamics in our approach. One, clearly, was programming adventurous work. That's how it started out. We also wanted to reimagine the theater-going experience so that it was less static and less passive. There was more added value to the idea of going to the theater. And we also wanted to help our existing audience, the subscribers, to find their own entry points into work they had not seen in prior years at CTG.
Next slide.
So we started out with Douglas Plus, and essentially it was an idea of breaking down the subscription model. We all live with them. We are at the moment stuck with them. It's my belief that over the coming years, the subscription model will either disappear completely or it will lose its value to an organization if that's how you build your business model. So we decided to change and present shows that were not subscribed. We would change, depending on what the show was, the length of the run, where we produced it in the theater, how the audience interacted with the show, and with ticket prices.
Next slide. So we've produced 24 different projects through Douglas Plus, and every single one of them has been a different experiment that pushed the boundaries of either the work on stage, the theater-going experience, or usually actually both. And so we're going to walk you through a few productions to give you a sense of how Douglas Plus artists were reimagining theaters for a new generation. Next slide.
The first show we did was Bones, and this was the play that Dale gave me, and it was great when we finally came up with a way to produce it, and it was great that we were able to work with her and to describe to her that her show, her play, had as much value to us as if we were doing a subscription show. But the greater value would be to put the right people in the room to experience it together. So on that particular show, we closed the stage off from the audience. It's a proscenium box, and we created a black box on stage. So we had all the technical elements there waiting for us, created a seating environment, created a smaller stage. And with that, we had a 120-seat theater, single ticket sales, and as I said, a good portion of them came from our subscribers, and then a whole new audience that had a much more intimate and impactful experience that I think, and Dale agreed with us, we would not have had if we had produced it under the model we were working under before this.
Next slide, please. So The Author by Tim Crouch is another play where we put the audience on stage, actually in two bleachers facing each other. It was an immersive, interactive experience. The actors sat among the audience and they engaged with them directly. Next slide, please. Joe Mama Jones, Radiate. This play was a hybrid between a play and a concert. It was a structured improvisation. Daniel Alexander Jones worked from an outline, but Joe Mama spoke directly to the audience that was there that night, responding to them and involving them throughout the play. The play culminated in a theater-wide dance party. Next slide, please. The Method Gun is an ensemble devised project. It was a completion commission that we gave here at CTG. It's an exuberantly nonlinear piece that's also consummately theatrical. The Rude Mechs communicate through all of the languages of the theater. The story was told as much through image and movement as it was through dialogue. It also involved very smart, moving audience participation. Patrons were asked at the beginning of the play to write down the name of their most influential teacher, and at the end of the play, those names were projected on stage as the cast did by in tribute. Next slide. The Projectionist.
The Projectionist was a play that we had on commission, and it was a play that took place in an old movie theater, in the lobby of an old movie theater. As it turns out, the Kirk Douglas Theater is an old movie theater built in the 1930s, and when we took it over, we did a complete renovation to turn it into a modern theater, but it still had a lobby. It still had a ticketing booth from the 30s out in front of the theater. That was one of the elements we kept. It still had the outdoor space. It had a concession space. So we decided to produce this show actually in the lobby. We were able to set up 50 seats, cram them into the lobby, facing the front of the theater, facing out onto the street. And this play, which was already written this way, it wasn't adapted for the space, then took place in an actual in-site situation with the actors tending the bar, working the ticketing booth, performing on the street through the glass of the lobby door. And one of the most fascinating things was, as the audience sat there, regular, normal people walking by the theater who were not part of the show itself, in effect, by default, became part of the show as if they were people passing by a movie theater. It turned out to be a terrific experience.
Next slide. The Elephant Room is another ensemble devised piece. And again, the story was told through all the languages of the theater. The artists used movement, image, and sound to communicate subtextual truths that the characters themselves were working very hard to deny with less and less success over the course of the evening. Next slide. So as you can see, we worked with brilliant and innovative artists who are reimagining the form for a new generation. Their work inspired us, and it informed our approach to our work, not just within Douglas Plus, but throughout all of our programming at the Douglas. In response to their work, we knew we needed to be more adventurous and proactive in how we framed the theater-going experience. So our approach is premised on two seismic shifts in our understanding of what it means to go to theater in the 21st century. Next slide. So I borrowed this terrific chart from Alan Brown and Rebecca Rudskin's invaluable paper, Making Sense of Audience Engagement. This is the arc of engagement. Traditionally, we would have just concentrated on that little pink section in the center, the play itself, as the locus of our work. But actually, audiences start telling the story of the play before they enter the theater, and they continue making meaning long after they leave. And those purple areas are vital opportunities for us to deepen our audience's engagement with and understanding of the work. Next slide. The other core assumption that guides our work is that it must be grounded in a participatory culture. Theater is, in its essence, an exchange between actors and audience. This is our competitive advantage. It's what makes it worth the expense of going out and seeing a play instead of staying at home and watching The Wire. So we think we need to question the strange etiquette that suggests the audience ought to pretend as though they don't exist. We need to create a culture where patrons are embraced as active conversation partners instead of passive consumers. Guided by these assumptions, we redefined our culture at the Douglas. Next slide. We've created a culture of lively discussion. The play is at the heart of a conversation that begins before the curtain goes up and continues after it goes back down. And there are a lot of ways that we do this. As you can see from the slide, because we're short on time, I'm just going to focus on a couple. Sandbox at CTG is a series where we invite the audience in on the early stage of a commission to join in the creative play of the artist's research and development process. We bring together the playwright, an expert, and our audience for a community conversation about the questions and ideas the playwright's exploring in the play. Afterwards is another program that we have that's at the other end of that arc of engagement. It's a book club type discussion that takes place after the run of the play. We discuss the artist's intentions, how they pursued those intentions, and how the audience connected with the work. What we found through these programs is that we're deepening our audience's artistic engagement with the work, and we're helping them feel comfortable with new writers whose work might feel unfamiliar. We're also building community. You guys, people stay around for like half an hour, 45 minutes after these events and continuing the conversation among themselves. We have to chase them out. Next slide. We're creating a culture of radical hospitality. We want people to feel at home in the Douglas from the first time they walk through the door. The heart of it is our concierge program. They're front of house staff that's tasked with actively engaging patrons in conversation, making them feel at home, and answering any questions they might have. They carry iPads, so they have answers to any questions at their fingertips. They're really great at what they do. They receive world-class customer service training, and they're passionate and knowledgeable about theater. 80% of them have a bachelor's or master's degree in theater. And they write a nightly report, which gives us useful information. Next slide. Immersive lobby experiences. So for each play, we create a participatory lobby experience that's specific to the work on the stage. We want to have a seamless and organic connection to the tone, style, intent of the piece of art and what we're doing in the lobby. Next slide, please. I think it's best to look at this through an example. So right now, the show that we have going on is Craft's Last Tape. Now, we want to create a lobby experience that allows every audience member to participate in a way that feels comfortable without intruding upon the experience of non-participants. Miriam Weisfield at Woolly Mammoth talks about appealing to skimmers, swimmers, and divers. That's what we're trying to do. So in the Craft's Last Tape, the lobby experience started weeks before rehearsal, the play got here, where we asked our audience to record a 1-minute audio diary from the point of view of an important moment in their past. And then we had listening stations in the lobby where people could hear those memories. We also had questions in the VOMs, like the one you're seeing in front of you, like anonymous stations where people can answer a thematically related question, see what other people have to say. And then finally, we have a pub chat after every performance. We've turned part of our lobby into what we're calling Sam's Pub, and we invite the audience to join us afterwards for a concierge-hosted conversation circle about the play. All of this has been tremendously successful. Next slide.
What we found out, well, to our great relief and not surprise, we did find out that what we were seeking to the connections we were seeking to make with our audience, they were seeking to make with us as well. In our entire audience base, new ticket buyers, subscribers, are hungry for engagement, for conversation, and for a deeper connection to the art and to the artists.
Next slide.
Clearly, the younger audiences love Douglas Plus because it is programmed for them, it is marketed for them. We have all of the elements that help them engage in the piece in a way that they're used to doing. And the older audiences, there was a somewhat mixed response, yet I would say that they're very appreciative of our efforts, and because there is a conversation going on about it, they understand the need for us to do it.
Next slide, and let's actually go to the following slide because we're going to return to this point. One back, one ahead, two ahead. So we're going to show you a chart that shows you, there you go, the audience response to some of our Douglas Plus shows. This is from our surveys. You're just going to see there's a 30-point gap between our oldest and youngest audience cohorts in how much they enjoyed the play and how likely they are to say that they'll recommend it to everyone they know. Next slide, please. We think we're seeing a generational aesthetic gap. We're hearing our younger audiences are likely to say that they love theater that includes the audience, that makes them think that is complex and not just another piece of bland realism. But our older audiences are saying things like they don't think it's theater, it didn't seem to have a plot, they didn't know what the point was. They're still saying they appreciated the originality of the programming, and they're hungry for conversation around the work. Next slide, please. And so we can talk about why this is, but I think what we're seeing here is that the problem of attracting younger audiences to the theater, it's not just about marketing, although marketing is important. It's also because there is an aesthetic gap between generations about the type of work that they respond to. Next slide, please.
All right, well, we've concluded that even though it takes time to change a culture, it's important to do it, and it's important to begin feeling the impact of it. And when we talk about changing the culture, it's not only with the audience. A big part of the change of the culture was with the staff itself. And one of the great benefits of a change of this depth and this significance is it challenged our staff in a way they hadn't been challenged prior to this, and it took a cross-departmental efforts for everybody to understand the value of it. The funny thing was we all had signed off on it in advance, and then when we got to the point of doing it, there was slight panic throughout the building of whether or not we should be doing it, could be doing it, why were we doing it, even though everyone had been in the conversation. So there was another moment of change, of embracing it. I will tell you right now that this organization is absolutely committed to not only Douglas Plus, but to the idea of continuing to move forward and make appropriate changes and take appropriate risks to move the organization forward.
And I think we found, like in the culture of discussion and engagement that we've created, we found a way to reconcile those two goals that we set out with. We can program work that's more daring, that unconventional, and that responds to the aesthetic of a younger generation. And we can also help audiences who might not be familiar with that type of work connect to it through finding points of entry through our conversations, our lobby experience, and all of the engagement that we're doing around the work. The next slide.
So we know that we will still have to remain as a business model using subscriptions as the base of our operations. And as I said, I believe that that's going to change somewhat significantly over the coming decade. But for now, it's the heart and soul of our operations. But within that, we know that we can make changes to a different audience, a different business model, a different presentation of the art, that in the long run, both short-term right now and in the long run, will be critical to not only to our existence, but to our vitality.
Great. Next slide. At the end, I think it's vital that we include and engage our audience. It's not enough anymore to rent a chair to an audience for 2 hours to consume an experience. They have to be conversation partners in a shared community experience. And that's the source of our strength. And that's the end. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael and Joy. It's actually a great segue into saying that we'd like to engage the audience on today's call. We have 2 questions so far. Feel free to chime in with more of them if you have them. You may submit a question using the question feature on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Again, want to thank our colleagues at Steppenwolf and Center Theater Group for really putting together what I hope you agree were great presentations. So we have 2 questions. One comes from Catherine Starrick. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. And that goes to our friends at Steppenwolf. And the question is, do you think millennial engagement would impact organizations other than theater in similar ways, symphony orchestras, for example?
Yes. I don't know as much about other kinds of arts organizations because I work in theater, but it would seem to me that the generational crisis in the performing arts is not confined to one single discipline. So, I mean, I would be really interested to have that conversation more broadly, but I would say absolutely.
I guess I would also suggest that if that's a question at your organization, that you find a way to talk to millennial audiences that come to your orchestra, for example, and ask them how they feel about it, because music is a different dynamic, and they might provide you some very interesting information on how they want to have share music with you and your organization.
That's really helpful, Linda. Thank you. Do our friends at Center Theater Group want to add anything to that?
No, except that we agree. We set out obviously for theater and for ourselves and didn't take the time to survey the idea that it would be cross-disciplinary, but I would have to believe that it would be.
I do think that people are hungry for times and places where they can come together with other people in the community where they live and have a shared experience. I think we've become increasingly fractured, and so many of our social experiences are mediated and segmented to cohorts that are like us. I think people really respond. There's a deep human need to have group engagement in whatever form it comes. So I think the more you can make these social, public square type experiences, Steppenwolf Theater, the more sustainable they'll be.
Great. Thank you very much. Another question from Amy Ratchford. How many people, this is actually a question for Steppenwolf, how many people or households does the 173% increase that you referred to, how many people does that translate into? In other words, how many people did you add to your audience, and how did that translate into revenue?
Well, first of all, I would just say that most of our measurement has focused on the Garage Theater, which is an 80-seat theater. So the numbers overall are not in the hundreds of thousands. I think in our latest, which is probably about 9 months old since the last time we took a measure, I think we're somewhere north of 700 in terms of net new millennial attenders. And we also know from another piece of data that these people are coming to more shows than they used to come. Before we started all of our efforts, we knew that the frequency of visit among this age group was somewhere below 1 time in a 12-month period, and now it's somewhere almost at 3. So we're feeling like we're making some strides in this. We certainly don't think we've finished the job, and we need to find a way, I think, to be cognizant of what kind of changes are happening to our audience composition inside our main theater at 1650 in the subscription season.
Thank you. So it looks like we have another question. Wonderful. Thank you. This is Catherine again. Thank you, Catherine. Wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question. Would love to learn more about millennial engagement and symphony orchestras. I think I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. Linda or Rebecca, do you have, beyond the suggestion that you made earlier, do you want to be more specific to respond to that?
I guess I'll just amplify the earlier comment, which is I think one of the suggestions that we would make to anyone who's interested in understanding this audience segment is to find yourself a professional marketing partner who can help you wade through all of the dead ends and complicating factors of talking to these people and finding out what you need to know in order to make your organization more successful. So I would say I used to work in an advertising agency. I would tell you that having an arts organization as a client, which we did pro bono, was a wonderful thing. It was we had employees in our agency that were really eager to work on an arts business because they found it to be something very different than their normal job, and they liked the idea of participating in the arts community in the city. So I would say see if you can make a call on someone in your city who is a marketing organization who would be interested in helping you figure this out.
Linda, I'm really glad that you said that. I was going to ask you to say it, so you beat me to the punch. Thank you. I remember we talked about this early on, the importance of being willing to reach out to folks and realizing that there may be pro bono services out there that don't necessarily occur to us. So again, thank you very much. We still have a few more minutes for questions, and we do not have one at the present. And what that says to me is I would welcome our colleagues from Center Theater Group and Steppenwolf to ask each other questions about your own experiences that you think might yield answers that would be of interest to the folks on the phone.
Okay, great. I have a thing that I think we can talk about. It's not so much a question, but you know, this is Rebecca from Steppenwolf. We did a presentation at our theater industry convening, TCG, about Garage Rep, which is one of the programs we have in our garage space. And we got into a conversation at that panel with some people from Center Theater Group about the Kirk Douglas. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, I mean, in some ways our experiments are quite similar, I think, that we've undertaken with this funding. And but one of the things that's different is that the Kirk Douglas Theater seats 300 and the garage seats 80. And I think that has some pretty interesting implications. And I guess I just wonder, I guess the question part of that would just be, you know, for Joy and Michael Ritchie, you know, what do you guys think about having a 300-seat house in order to do this kind of experiment with cultivating new audiences? Does that feel like the right size?
Boone was a sort of a hybrid. We still run a subscription season at the Kirk Douglas Theater, but instead of 6 shows, it's 3 shows or 4 shows. And we leave dark times sporadically throughout the season, clumps of time, 2 weeks at a time, 3 months at a time, for us to do our Douglas Plus programming. So it becomes integrated into that 300-seat theater. But because we have shortened runs on the Douglas Plus shows, we're able to do it in the 300-seat theater or create our own configurations of, at this point now, we've done 50 seats in the lobby, 120 seats on stage, 100 in the rehearsal room upstairs, which we've adapted into a black box. But the bigger thing we've done with Douglas Plus, outside of the programming, all of that added value, that engagement that we brought to it, the concierges, the lobby experiences, the afterwards, we've continued with our subscription audience. You don't go to the show at the Douglas without having an experience where the play is bookended before and after with some kind of contact or content or conversation with CTG and with the artists. We've also been able to move some of that down to our 2 main theaters. The Taper is a 750-seat theater, and the Amundsen is 2,200 seats. But when we did Lieutenant of Inishmore at the Taper, because it was a play that had the ability to offend some audience members, we brought the concierge program to the Taper so that they were there to help that audience both before, during, when we had walkouts, and afterwards to contextualize their experience in the most positive way.
And I think what we've been able to do is kind of shift a culture over time. So at the outset of this grant, we didn't have an audience that would fill, you know, Bones or Elephant Room for a standard 4-week subscription run in a 300-seat house. But so by presenting these shows in smaller doses, you know, and making sure that we have engagement and conversation around them, what we're able to do is kind of build a constituency among our subscriber base, build a kind of a familiarity with different types of work, and help them find ways to connect to it, so that over time we're starting to integrate more and more Douglas Plus projects or projects that began in Douglas Plus into our subscription season. And I think what we found is that older audiences actually want to connect to this work. It's just sometimes it's using codes and forms of storytelling that feel unfamiliar to them. And so by contextualizing, by having sustained conversations over time, by building fan bases for artists, so that an audience can see a particular work in the context of a larger body of work, we're able to help audiences that might not respond to a play that they're just kind of plunged into cold, like find ways in, find points of entry, and enjoy it.
Wow, that was great. Thank you. We do have one more question. I'm hoping we can get a brief response so we can end on time. And that question comes to us again from Amy, and thank you, Amy. Thanks. She says, thanks for answering my earlier question. She's curious to know what, if any, methods either theater used through social media to engage and interact with the audience.
I think both of us probably have.
I can speak to Steppenwolf, and that is we are in constant communication, I guess you would say, with our audience through Facebook and through Twitter. We have someone on staff whose job it is to make sure that we are responding to whatever audiences are asking of us or commenting on in social media. We have, through our website redesign, better integrated social media into the website so that conversation is not so compartmentalized. And we ask a lot of, we sometimes do ticket giveaways, sometimes we have Facebook parties. We try to initiate a lot of conversation through social media.
And I think we're doing a lot of those same things. I would add, I think, two things that we're doing. One is that we're trying to create shareable content. So, like, for example, for Elephant Room, we had a picture of the three guys who look amazing and hilarious from the show with a quote from the show over it. I think magic is a way of life, not just a way we make enough to airbrush our van. And so, like, something that's kind of funny and cheeky and that people might share to kind of build awareness of the show and also of the tone and style of the play. And then another thing we're doing is we're creating synchronicity between our audience engagement virtually and the experience they have when they come to the theater. So I mentioned that we started for Cross Last Tape, we solicited these audio diaries from people online using Twitter and Facebook. Then they're being played in the theater, and there's also aggregated on a website, so folks can listen to them either before they come to the show, after they come to the show. So I think those are some things that we're doing.
Great, thank you so much. I'm aware of time and want to first thank all of our presenters for taking the time to be here today. Really fantastic job of presentations, and we hope that your experiences have been helpful to the field. Want to wrap up by sort of restating something I said earlier, which is that one of the goals of this initiative has been to help provide flexible dollars that allow organizations to adapt to their environment and to experiment. And to use money to help you do that is a really, really wonderful thing to have. And it is our hope that through this work, and as we mentioned earlier, we'll be sharing our lessons from this initiative and continuing dialogue with the George C. Charitable Foundation and other funders to see what are some creative ways we can help the field access this kind of money going forward. And I also want to say thank you to everyone who's participated by phone and internet today. Thank you for joining us. We'll be sending out an email soon with today's presentation and recording. We also invite you to visit the new web page that we have exclusively devoted to NFF's work and learning in the arts. The previous slide had that information, was up for a little while there. And if you missed our previous webinars in the series, first with leaders from the Alvin Ailey Dance Foundation and the Worcester Group, and with leaders from Jacobs Film Festival, Ping Chong and Company and City Company, you can find links to those sessions on our Arts and Culture webpage. And finally, if you're not on our arts email list and would like to receive our e-bulletin, which comes out periodically for nonprofits and funders, please feel free to send me an email at the address on this slide. Again, I'm Rodney Christopher. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day.